Good evening, Calvary Chapel Book Club. Thank you very much for having me in the Viera campus. It's good to see everybody, although I can't see anyone. For those of you who don't know or not sure, my name is Mynheir, and it is a pleasure to be with you, even if it's by video here today. Again, thank you for having me. Hopefully we can discuss a little bit today of my novel Rolling Thunder, which you're reading, and I hope you enjoyed it. What I want to do is share a little bit today about me, about why I write, how I got started, and a little bit about the novel itself, and hopefully can answer some of your questions that were so gracefully sent in by Rachel. Thank you, Rachel, very much, by the way. So first off, let me tell you a little bit about me. Okay, for those of you who don't know me, I was born and raised in this county. I've been a police officer here now for 28 years. I was with Palm Bay PD for a long time, and I was with Cocoa Beach PD before that. But I am a Brevard County native. I was born and raised in this county on Merritt Island. Grew up there. My dad worked out at the Space Center. My mom worked out at Pan Am. And, so like I say, all my roots are in this county. So let me start you off, as a young man, a lot of writers, and stuff like that. There are a lot of writers I talk with. Almost all of them knew from a very early age that they wanted to be writers. Well, I was not one of those people. I really struggled in school. I had a difficult time. Moved around a lot when I was a young man. My parents divorced when I was young. And I struggled. When I say struggled, I pulled horrible grades. I really didn't understand at the time what was going on, but I did learn later what had happened, that I actually had learning disabilities. But you got to understand when we went, when I'm talking about elementary school up through high school and stuff in the early 70s and 80s, learning disabilities weren't well known. I have what's called dyslexia and dysgraphia. It disrupts the ability to read and to write effectively. Again, it's varying degrees and stuff like that. But I didn't know that, so I struggled in school to the point of by the time I was 17 in high school, I actually dropped out of high school and enlisted in the Marines, which ended up being a very interesting experience in and of itself, which may have a book in there someday. But when I say I struggled. I was not like a lot of writers who grew up loving writing and doing that. The written word has been my enemy since I can remember. For me, even now, to handwrite and to try to write down anything handwise, if I have to type it, because I still struggle with dyslexia. But thank goodness for computers and spell check, or else I'd be in a lot of trouble. But so my writing career definitely did not start as a young person. It's not anything that I ever really seriously considered that I would do. If you would ask me when I was 12 years old, what are the favorite things you're going to do? What do you think you're going to do for a living when you get older? Professional writer would have been about 170th on the list. There's just no way. But God has a funny way of bringing things around. So as I said, I really struggled as a young man, struggled in school, and just my whole academic career as a young man was just difficult. I just stayed in high school long enough to play football, and that was about it. Went in the Marine Corps, and for me personally, that was an excellent thing. I'm so glad I did that, because it got me away, got me into something that I really thrived at. I enjoyed the Marines. And it also, by God's providence, it's amazing how these things happen. I was not a Christian man. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. Not that my parents are bad or anything like that, but it was just not a focus in our life. And so as I was in the Marines, I got sent to a base where I really didn't want to go. And at this base, they were having a program to take all people who didn't graduate from high school, put them through high school during duty hours, and then you come out with a diploma and stuff like that. I remember I went into our gunnery sergeant's office, and they're telling us about the program and everything like that. And I'm like, and we used to call our gunnery sergeants gunnies. And I said, well, that's real nice, gunny, but I'm not interested. Of course, in typical Marine Corps fashion, he said, oh, you thought I was asking. So I was basically ordered to go back to high school, which I did. And I got my high school diploma when I was in the Marine Corps. And that set the stage for me being able to get out after 4 years and get into police work. Again, another thing I really never thought in my life that I would be getting into. I was still not a Christian at this point, but I was trying to do the right things. And I got out and I came back home. I lived with my dad, and I went to the police academy. And I did pretty well in the academy. I was fresh out of the Marines. I could shoot fairly well, and I could run and do all that kind of stuff. But when it came to writing reports, which police officers do a lot, I knew I was in trouble because I still really struggle. And this was long before the age that everybody had a word processor and stuff like that. And I actually, at this point, did not know that I had dyslexia and learning disabilities. But I struggled. I knew, so I barely squeaked my way through the portion of the academy on report writing. I had to do some serious creative work to get that done. But got through the police academy, and initially, my response to police work was I kind of just needed a job. I needed a job getting out of the Marines, and as I got into it, though, and as I got into the academy, and then I got my first police job at Cocoa Beach Police Department, I suddenly fell in love with it. I thought, this is it. I have found what I enjoy doing. They pay me money to get out here and chase people, and oh my goodness, this is great. So I really thrived, and I felt I'd found myself for the first time in my life. I was really excited about what I was doing. And during the course of this time, I happened to meet a young woman, actually at my police academy graduation party, who would eventually become my wife. And she's wonderful. We started dating, and of course, as far down on the academic scale as I was in high school, she was like class valedictorian. I mean, we were totally opposites. And we ended up getting married, and she love of my life. And we've been married now almost 25 years, coming up in May. And so we got married, and our life was actually, my life was going great. I had no complaints. I had a job I loved. I ended up going over to Palm Bay Police Department. I wanted a larger police department where I could eventually get on the SWAT team and do narcotics and do all that kind of fun stuff. So I went to Palm Bay PD. My wife and I got engaged and got married. And I tell you, Arl, my life was on top of the world. It was good. Writing was not even entered into my mind. Police work was all I wanted to do. I had a great wife. Then she got pregnant with our son, our first child, and God ended up rocking our world just a bit. When she was in vitro with our son Christopher now, he was diagnosed with what's called hydrocephalus, which is a buildup of fluid on the brain. And I tell you, it brought me to my knees. They did ultrasounds, and they were showing us, we're having all sorts of complications with Chris, and he wasn't even born yet. And I remember when the ultrasound scanned his face, I'd never had a feeling like that. I could see my son's face, and he was in trouble, and there was nothing I could do to help him. Nothing. And by this point in my life, I felt myself a pretty strong, tough guy, and, Marines and police, and feeling completely and utterly helpless watching my son there. And I just felt he's dying and I can do nothing. And my wife was raised in the church. She was born and raised Lutheran, and she always knew a relationship with the Lord. I was attending church, but to be fair, I had not surrendered my life to Christ, and I knew it too. I knew I was kind of playing a half of a game. I would go to church on Sunday, keep my wife happy, and occasionally nod to a couple of things, but I was never really committed to Christ. And at this point, with the illness of my son and everything, it just drove me to my knees. And, and I prayed, God, whatever, just if you'll let my son know just joy and happiness, we'll give him a good life, but I'll do whatever you want me to do. And of course, I do what a lot of people do. I made the promises, I'll be a better person. I'll stop swearing. And I kept trying to, still trying to do it all in my own power, and I'll do this and I'll do that. And so, God in his grace, I tell you, he lets us find out the hard ways sometimes. But so we're praying for my son, and I was really, I was praying that God would heal him. I had an awareness of God, but I was not a Christian. But I knew He was there. I knew God was alive and real. I just had not given Him my heart. But I was praying out, and I prayed for healing. But I prayed again that He would, if He would just let my son know joy and happiness, we would be happy with that. And the day my son was born, the hydrocephalus, it actually crushes down on the brain, and they were going to do neurosurgery and insert a shunt into the brain that would drain the fluid down into the stomach. So we're preparing for all these things. I'm going to be a new father. I had no idea how to do that. All the stress with the medical issues with Chris and everything. And I was wiped out. I was on my knees a lot. I was praying. And So we go through the whole 18 hours of the labor. I said my wife. Anyway, I was there though. But 18 hours of labor, my son is born, and all these emotions are there, and they're getting ready to take him in for surgery to do this, and they do one more MRI on him to see where the pooling is and stuff like that. And the neurologist came in. I remember him looking at us going, and he's kind of exasperated, and he's like, "Who gave you the diagnosis of hydrocephalus?" I mean, it was one of the best doctors in the state. We actually had to go to Arnold Palmer and do all that, and we told him who. He's like, "He doesn't have hydrocephalus. He's fine. Take your son home." And I mean, God, we saw it. We saw the pooling. We saw everything. I mean, it wasn't like this was, oh, maybe or maybe not. We knew what it was. We knew that God had miraculously healed our son. But God, being true to his word, let me try to live out, I was going to be a better person, nicer person, stop swearing and all those kind of things. Well, about 6 months into this, trying to be a new father, I totally failed at everything. I felt guilty. I knew God had healed my son. But again, I was trying to do it all in my own strength. And finally, 6 months into it, I was into a depression. I was just flabbergasted. And God brought a godly man into my life who gave me the real gospel and shared with me what it was. And I got on my knees and gave my life to Christ. That was real. I knew something had happened. And that started my spiritual walk with the Lord, really. And so I was a new father, trying to be a good husband, trying to do all these things, but God radically changed my life. And this was, like I say, now 22 years ago. And so I immediately felt so many areas of my life were changing. I mean, it was just, and if any of you can remember being a new Christian, what that feels like, that joy and that, I was odd for God, man. I'm running around telling everybody, woo, it was a great time. But in that time, God was giving me certain new passions too. And I just felt God telling me that he wanted me to write, because I was always the class clown. I told you I struggled in school, but I was always the class clown. I'd get in trouble a lot. I was always silly and flicking things and just whatever I could do just to not do schoolwork. So I had a creative streak that I didn't even realize was there. And I felt God calling me out on that to start writing stories. And I had stories in my head and I had ideas, but I thought it could never happen. It just couldn't happen. And so, I'm kind of feeling this draw, and I finally share it with my wife, and that was probably foolish. We shouldn't do stuff like that. Because as soon as I said it to my wife, I expect her, being the logical and grounded person in the relationship, to say, "Oh, Mark, that's real nice, but that's not really where you need to go." But of course she didn't say that. She said, "Great, well, why don't you get back to school and, upgrade your education, learn how to write and write books." And I'm like, "Oh, no, honey, you don't understand. I can't write. I can't do that, And so after much warring against God and my wife, I finally went back to school. I had to take a year and a half of preparatory classes just to build my education level back up to a place where I could take credentialed classes. It was a long process, but in this, God kept giving me these stories, and I would, I would write a little while and try to write them, and then, I would learn more. I'd go take a class or, do something like that, and I'd go back and look at what I did, and it looked like a train wreck, and I'm like, oh, I delete it all, and, I learned how to type, I learned how to use the computer, and did all this, and it was a long, growing process. I took some creative writing classes, and I started building, and then I saw, in the newspaper, I saw an advertisement for a Christian Writers Conference. And I thought, well, what in the heck is that? I had no idea what that would be. So, I was stressing out. I was like, I don't know if I should go to this. Should I spend the money? Should I spend the time? What is this going to do? Am I really going insane or what? So I put together a package of whatever I thought they might like, editors and publishers. And at this point, I'd had no contact with any kind of publishing, anything. And I went to the conference, and the stuff I had submitted actually got some pretty nice reviews. And I was able to send a book proposal to Tyndale Publishers, which shocked me. I knew who they were, at least. They did the Left Behind series and everything. And ultimately, it ended up being rejected. But that was fine. I still was like, okay, that's a confirmation that God you do want me to go on this path, because I wasn't sure. Again, by this time, my daughter was born. I'm trying to keep my my family together and do all that. And, should I spend the money, time, and resources writing? And then this was a real good confirmation. So I kept working on it. And I actually wrote my first novel. It's called The 13th Hour. Got to submit it to a number of publishers. I met my agent through the next Christian Writers Conference I went to. Got him, we submitted it. And I really worked on the book a long time, but ultimately that book never sold. The first book I actually sold was Rolling Thunder. And so I'll kind of segue into this on Rolling Thunder, going from a little bit of my testimony about my actual testimony and writing, but into Rolling Thunder and how that came about. Again, I spent a lot of hours, a lot of time working on my first novel, but I learned a lot. Even though it never sold, I used that to kind of help develop the craft of writing. I read a lot of books on writing. I got Writer's Digest, and I really, it took a long time. I went numerous drafts through that first book of just trying to get it to be the best it could be. But ultimately it didn't sell, and I knew it at one point. There's just a point where you know what, I'm going to put this on the shelf. I'm going to let it sit for a while, and I'm going to try something new. And I had this idea. And it's going to segue into one of the questions, as a matter of fact, that I was given. But I had seen on the news where a child was missing from DCF custody, which that as an investigator, and by this time I was actually, by this time I was working in the violent crimes and the homicide unit when I started writing this book. Now you got to understand, this is numerous years have gone by in the evolution of where I was learning to write and upgrading my education and doing those kind of things. So by this time I was working in the violent crimes and the homicide unit, and which, by the way, the writing really, really helped by the time I got there, getting my education upgraded, but that's a side note. But there was the case of Ryla Wilson, who was missing from Florida State DCF care, and that intrigued me as an investigator. I'm like, how in the world can a child be missing? What? So the gears started kind of turning in my head. As an investigator, what in the world? Who would I love to talk to about that? Who would I like to interview? What happened? And so that always turned in my mind. But the real catalyst for Rolling Thunder actually happened. I was listening to an interview with. I used to listen to Focus on the Family and James Dobson, and he was telling a story of a man who was a construction worker in his 40s, and he had. His father was extremely abusive, and he worked construction, and his dad was so abusive that he would beat him every time he was home. So even this man now in his mid-40s, whenever he heard thunder going, it was almost like a Pavlov's dog's reaction, because the thunder used to signify that his father would be on the way home. That would mean it would start raining, and it would somehow. So every time it would thunder, he would start going into anxiety attacks and stuff. And that character, I thought of this man as I remember I was driving, I'd heard on the radio, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what a story that man must have. So I started kind of working on it in my head, going, wow, what a character. What goes on, all the little things that writers and police officers ask, the who, what, when, where, why. I started asking about a person like this. What would happen? And I thought, well, what if this is somebody who's a police officer and a Christian? Because, of course, we all know that somebody, can't be a Christian and still have struggles from the past and still struggle with different issues and forgiveness and all the other. That could never happen as a Christian. And if it doesn't translate well into video, that's sarcasm, because I think, we still, even though Christ heals us in many areas, sometimes some of those areas take a long time. And it was funny because this is a book on forgiveness. And I had other people in mind when I started writing this book. Oh, they really need to hear this message. So I was getting a little haughty about it and writing it, of course, for other people. But I realized as I was getting into this book and understanding the characters and the story that God, if for no one else on the planet, God had me write that book for me. It had me try to deal with some things in my own heart and some things that I kind of needed to let go. So I know where it came from, and it was cathartic to write this book. Of course, there's always with your first book, I can imagine it's like your first anything, but it's kind of like my baby. That was a lot of emotion went into that, a lot of personal history that nobody else can unravel or see, but I know that's in there. a lot of emotion and stuff like that. So Rolling Thunder has a real special place in my heart for a number of reasons. But by the end of it, by the time the editing was done and everything, I had truly realized that God had me write that book for me. Again, if other people like it and enjoy it and are blessed by it, I think that's wonderful. And as a writer and as a person, as a Christian, that makes my heart happy. But you know what? At the end of the day, the book helped me. So that's kind of my attachment with the story. How I got there. I wanted to try to develop characters again, and I wanted to give an insight. I wanted people to kind of see what police work is like. And, you know, as a Christian police officer, you know, we have families, we have a life outside of police work, but it always revolves around the police work. You know, it never goes away. Police work's unlike any other job in as much as it's 24/7. So I wanted to try to give a little bit of a view of what that would look like in the context of a Christian police officer, and give them engaging characters, and meld that with the story of a child missing from DCF, from their custody. So that's kind of how the story started. That's how I got into it. And again, being my first book, I learned so much in the editing process. I was working with my editor, who was just fabulous, you know. And I told her, I said, look, this is my first book. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Anything you think can help me as a writer grow, any area you see that you think I could really learn to develop, any resources, any articles, send them my way. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Okay. I want to learn this craft. I want to grow. So that's how Rolling Thunder kind of came to be. It is a passion of a lot of different things that all went into one thing. And again, what it ended up being, I did not see. I didn't go into it with a lot of the intent that I think I came out with it. So again, writing it was a blessing for me, and I think again it was God-led, in my opinion. So, so at this point, I guess I'll take questions. Is there anybody with questions out there? You raising your? Okay, all right. Enough of that. I know we have questions, but I'm going to have to get my spectacles on, and we'll go over them. Okay, a question from Mary. Okay, thank you, Mary, for giving me your question. The controversy over Chris Kyle and American Sniper alludes to the questions about Chris's character. Do you feel your job was similar in that you compromised your values to bring down the bad guys? Wow, a little light question from Mary. Actually, that's a fabulous question. Because there's I read Chris Kyle's book before the movie came out, and, you know, he was a professing Christian. The movie doesn't go into his faith nearly as in depth as the book does. And it's almost like a dichotomy at times, especially now the sniper situation is a bit different than police work, but still, when I first got saved, I'd been in police work 4.5, almost 5 years, and I almost left police work. I almost thought, you know, I can't continue to do this, because I was working a high crime area. I was in patrol. Every night it seemed I put my hands on somebody. And you got to understand, laying on of hands in police work is significantly different than what it means in the church, okay? So, I mean, I was fighting every night, it seemed. Constant shooting and gun calls. I was on the SWAT team. I was doing a lot of different stuff like that. So when I came to Christ, and I mean, like I told you, it was a very emotional time for me, I almost walked away from police work. I said, I don't know that I can do this. I just don't know that I can keep, you know, going and sometimes having to hurt people and arresting them and doing those kind of things and still be a professing Christian. I wasn't sure. And it was right during this time. I mean, I'd never read the Bible before, so I'm reading the Bible. I'm trying to look at, you know, what God's Word says. And there was an article in the paper by Billy Graham, and it was basically the necessity of military and police officers in a fallen world. And it just right, of course, God's timing. It was the perfect time for that article. I'm reading it going, you know, we live in a fallen world. There is evil, and evil needs to be confronted. It needs to be confronted intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, and sometimes when there can be no other way to stop it, evil needs to be stopped physically. And God is a God of justice. So that really helped me a lot, because I was like, you know what? God is a God of justice. This is true. It's not that I'm trying to be mean or vindictive or anything like that, but I'm going to do what I have to do to make sure that justice is upheld in the community, that I'll defend myself, fellow officers, and other citizens from evildoers. And it's hard sometimes. It's difficult. There's things that keep you awake at night, but at the same time, when you know that it's a righteous cause, it may be ugly, but we keep doing it. So I kind of I at least understand, Chris Kyle and the struggle there, at least from that aspect. Again, it's a little bit different, but we lived it, now for almost 28 years, been living police work, and the last 22 as a Christian. Yeah, there's some struggles, but at the end of the day, we have to stop evil, and we have to uphold justice. And I think of Romans 13 and a number of scriptures that talk about that. But that's a great question. That's pretty deep for the first one. Thank you very much, Mary, for that. Okay, let me read. Okay, question from Kirsten. I believe that writing is derivative. I think that good writing comes from good reading. That's a quote from Charles Correll. What authors have influenced your writing? What books did you read in 2014? Excellent question. I told you that I explained that I'm dyslexic. My reading comprehension is actually pretty good, but I read very, very slowly. I am a slow reader. It takes me a while to get through a book, so I have to be very selective on my reading. A lot of my influences have been like Angela Hunt, in the Christian market especially, Angela Hunt, Davis Bunn, Randy Alcorn. I love the Deception series. Randy Singer. In the more secular realm, I read T. Jefferson Parker and Michael Conley are probably my favorite crime writers as far as that go. I read Terry Blackstock a lot. So, I mean, I've kind of, fiction-wise, those are the ones that have really impacted me. 2014, now that's interesting, because I was looking at, when I looked at the question, I went back down to my reading list, and almost all of my reading has been nonfiction this year. I kind of took a break and I read a lot of nonfiction. I just finished Hitler's Cross, which was an excellent book. I read some church history, Eusebius's church history, and some church history books. I kind of wanted to see a foundation of the historical church, and so I did a lot of research like that. But I did read some novels. I read Davis Bunn's novel. I think it was the Sign Painter. That was excellent. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And I actually read a number of novels in the series from, it's a very secular series from Richard Marcinko. He's a former Navy SEAL, and I had actually met him back in the 80s when I was in the Marine Corps, so I saw he had a book series, so I ended up reading some of those. But that was most of my reading for 2014. A lot of church history stuff. Anyway, and those novels, those are the ones I've read. I wouldn't recommend the Marcinko novels for this group, but I found it interesting because I actually knew the guy. So, but that's where I am on that, on my reading list. And again, I vary my reading quite a bit. I try to read secular author, Christian author, and then I read a lot of nonfiction as well. I read Michael Behe's Black Box just a couple weeks ago, which is about evolution and the irreducible complexity of a cell and stuff. So I kind of have a varied reading list. But anyway, thank you very much, Kristen, for that question. And you also ask, for various reasons, many authors who are Christians choose to write secular books. Why did you choose to write Christian fiction? Well, I got to be honest with you. At the time, I just didn't see any other option. In police work, I live in kind of a very difficult, dark, and vile world at times. There's a lot of profanity. There's a lot of just the world of a police officer is really, really difficult. And that's before we ever even leave the police station. Okay. I'm just talking about being around other officers. It's very dark and a difficult place to be. I didn't want to write that. When I was going to write some crime stories, and when I wanted to write something that honored God, that glorified Him. I didn't need to live with all the profanity and all the other things that would accompany or be expected for a secular crime novel. Again, not always. I mean, there are some, Michael Conley's not real horrible about that and stuff. But I just really felt led to write in the CBA. I felt the stories that I had at the time were more conducive for the CBA as well. Now, could that change in the future, or what does the future look like? I have no idea. I'm still not going to compromise, what I know to be right and true, as far as what I want to communicate to somebody else and what I want them reading. And you got to understand, my mom's still alive. My mom reads my books. I'm not going to write anything that's going to upset my mom. So that's kind of where I am on that. Also, um, we love to follow local authors as yourself, Rachel Howe, Dan Walsh. Both Rachel and Dan have co-authored books. Have you considered collaborating with other authors? Yes and no. It's very difficult. I had another author that we were entertaining the idea, but as we got into it, we just both realized it wouldn't work. It doesn't mean it's good or bad, but it's very hard when you're an author, you take ownership of your story. I mean, I have the story in my head, and I'm not saying I'm overly stubborn or that it's always right, but it would be very difficult to make that creative meld on fiction. Now, it can be done. There's authors, like Rachel and Dan have done that, and they've done it successfully. I don't know. I guess the right opportunity would have to present itself. I did have, like I said, I had one opportunity. We worked on it. We discussed it. We did a little bit of early work, but we both realized it probably wasn't a good fit. You have to have the right fit with the right authors who the right story and are working together and understand each other's role and responsibility. I mean, it is a hard thing to do. It can be done because it has been done successfully. Will I ever do it? I have no idea. I guess we'll have to see. So, okay. Another question. All right. This does not have somebody attributed to it. As I read Rolling Thunder, I seem to remember a child in DCF custody that went missing. Was Dylan's storyline inspired on true events? Yeah, the answer to that is absolutely, as I'd said before. At least, yes, at least partially. With Rolling Thunder and with every other book that I've written, I've actually taken portions of what I've done in some police interviews. You'll see, a lot of my friends who've read the books who either know about the interviews or done it, or people, they'll kind of like, hey, was this when my old partner was like, was this interview when we were up in the jail doing that? So almost verbatim, So for the stories, I've pulled from a lot of sources, but the DCF storyline definitely came from the Riley Wilson case because, again, it just fascinated me. I think that's it on questions. You may have more questions. You may have anything you just want to discuss. You can certainly reach me at my email, which is mmynheir, MMYNHEIR, @earthlink.net. Please reach out to me anytime. I would love to answer any questions. And I so appreciate you taking the time to read my book. I mean, I know it's a lot to ask of you. We invest a lot of time together as the author and the reader. It is a big investment. You've spent your time, your money, and I just hope that you found the story worthwhile and enjoyable. And I know it was for me writing. Like I say, it was almost like giving birth to my first child in a way. But again, I really appreciate you having Rolling Thunder as your book I think it's this month in your book club, and having me here. It's been a great honor. And please, if there's anything I can do, let me know. Again, thank you all very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and take care and God bless. Thank you very much.